Good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here with you. Last year, I kind of invited myself. This year, they invited me back, and I'm pleased that they did. General McNabb, always great to see you. General Miller, it's really my honor to have the opportunity to continue to serve with you. Mary Ann has been a tremendous partner to Air Combat Command in her role as the commander of Air Force Reserve Command, and I really look forward to working with you to help make the Air Force better over the years to come. I also want to extend my thanks to the senior statesmen and state women of this great enterprise, and thank you for your leadership over the years and for being with us here again today. It's a pleasure to be here with you. This is a fabulous convention. I enjoyed reading through the brochures on all the panels and sessions, lots of interesting things. I know you've had a tremendous speaker list. I'll confess to you that I plan on this year trying to take some of the things that you do and bring it into WEPTAC, which is a little bit of our Air Combat Command version of this, where in general we bring people in the day after New Year's, work them like dogs for 2 weeks, and then send them back home. And we're going to try to introduce some of the professional development and the senior leader opportunities that you have here. I enjoyed getting a chance to visit with your award winners last night, a fantastic group of people. Well done to them and well done to you for recognizing them. And finally, I have to confess that it was kind of nice to be out on your shop floor last night, on your show floor, and be a little incognito and invisible and not feel like a fish in a shark tank like I do at the ACC versions of this with all my industry friends. It was fun. So thanks for inviting me back. I also want to thank you and the entire mobility enterprise for all the support you've given to the airmen and families of the 325th Fighter Wing down at Tyndall. From the very first day, we were flooded with volunteers in the ACC Crisis Action Team to be able to do whatever it took to take care of our airmen and families there. It was a complete total force effort. We had airlifters from the Guard, the Reserve, and the active duty. The day after the storm, the contingency response group rolled in and helped us make sure the airfield would be usable. In the days after that, we rapidly deployed a Harvest Bear tent city so that we could bring in TDY airmen, which really gave us the opportunity to let Tyndall's assigned airmen stay with their families in safe haven and look after them through the uncertainty and bring in TDY airmen to do the things that had to be done immediately at the base. You ran shuttles for 1st Air Force back and forth from their contingency operating location back and forth as they maintained their facilities and tried to keep them open and well. And I couldn't be more appreciative to you and all the MASCOMs around the Air Force for all that they did to help there. So thanks very much. It really was a demonstration of the mobility advantage that our nation possesses because of you. I will share just a little bit about Tyndall with you since we have this opportunity, and Hurricane Michael. I try to put myself in the shoes of the wing commander down there, Colonel Laidlaw, and it was a uniquely fast-building storm and a uniquely powerful storm, and it was a precision storm that targeted itself directly at Tyndall. So you may have seen the picture that's available on the internet that shows the eye wall of the storm with all of Tyndall inside the eye. And so what that means is that they got almost 150 knots of wind in one direction as the storm reached Tyndall. And then when the backside of the wall got there, they got almost 150 knots of wind in the other direction, which had a very powerful impact on the base. On Saturday morning before the storm, I woke up and was doing a little work and did what I'm want to do, and many of you commanders do this time of year, is go to the National Hurricane Warning Center page to see what's next and to see what's coming out there. I saw a storm, tropical storm Michael down in the Gulf. I talked to my friends at the HAF. We were scheduled to go to Hurlburt to have Air Force SOCOM warfighter talks that week. So I said, hey, are we turning this off? Are we still going to do this? And they said, nah, it's a tropical storm, 40, 50 knots wind, some rain, tops, don't worry about it. By Sunday, that was called off. On Sunday at Tyndall, Colonel Laidlaw already had a weekend duty crew in to work on his airplanes to try to get ready for the impending storm. On Sunday, he called in the rest of his maintenance group to start getting those airplanes ready. and set an evacuation time of 15:30 on Tuesday afternoon based on the storm. On Monday, the Monday of a 3-day weekend, the wing began launching their aircraft out and got everything out they could on Monday. And Colonel Laidlaw set a timeline, a deadline of Tuesday at noon to get the last flyable airplanes off the base and then to hangar the rest to safeguard them and to evacuate the base by 1500. And what that did was it gave his airmen 12 hours to get off the base, across the roads where everybody else was leaving Panama City and the Panhandle, and get to a safe haven. And as a result of that decision, there wasn't a single injury and certainly not a death in the 11,000 folks that worked there at Tyndall. So my hat's off to Colonel Laidlaw and the steps that he took, and I only would like to think that I would have done as good a job if I was in his place. In the days to follow, we wanted to support Colonel Laidlaw and his efforts and not take over from him, but to bring him the help that he needed. So we brought in Combat Comm, we brought in defenders to help relieve his folks that rode the storm out, and we brought in engineers. We established 3 task forces of TDY folks that would come in and work together under a colonel who would work directly for Colonel Laidlaw, but bring in all the resources that the Air Force possessed. So Task Force HARP, Housing, Assignments, Relocation, and Posture, was designed to focus on the airmen of Tyndall. What would it take to get them back into their homes, to check on their household goods? How would we arrange for them to safeguard those goods? Start thinking about assignments for people that were inbound to Tyndall, for people that had deployment taskings lined up, to work through the people that were deployed and find out what they wanted to do. To start thinking about relocation options, and then to think about the future of Tyndall. So Task Force HARP stood up to do that. Task Force Phoenix, then, we brought in combat engineers to take a look at the base to see what we could do to safeguard the buildings as they were by putting tarps on them, by getting the power and water turned back on so we could try to keep them as dry as we could, because mold is the menace in the days after that kind of hurricane. And they're still working. And then Task Force Raptor brought in maintainers and structural engineers to get the aircraft that were left behind safely out of their hangars and repair them and get them back into a safe place. So all 3 of those task forces are thriving under Colonel Laidlaw's direction, and we look forward to the future at Tyndall. We also put a group together to capture lessons in the way we collect weather data, in the way that we look at the forecasts and our command and control, in the way we posture our wings during hurricane season, and try to gain some lessons from the structures. Colonel Laidlaw and his team took the best information they had about which hangars were designed to handle more wind, and it turned out none of that was very accurate. The hangars that had a design life that would take the highest winds turned out to receive some of the most damage, and some little flat ones that were rated at 75 knots lasted through the hurricane with no problems. So we'll try to learn what we can from that. And again, thanks very much for your help as we walk through that process. I also want to thank you for my personal daily interaction with the Mobility Enterprise, which is through the Operational Support Airlift C-21 crews that get me around the country. Those crews make my job possible. They make my life better, and they've introduced me to some of the finest $1 meals at FBOs all over the Midwest. I love those guys. Last year when I was here with you, we got a chance to talk about the world and the way it's changing, and I won't spend too much time going over that. You've heard a lot of talk about it in the year since, but to summarize, our world is changing, and it's changing rapidly. We're back in a world where competition between great powers dominates our lives as military members. We still have to deal with rogue states and violent extremist organizations, but we know that great powers are pursuing whole-of-government, whole-of-nation efforts to compete with the United States and our position in the world. And that competition has a military component every day that stays mostly below the level of armed conflict. Our job is to recast that competition on terms that are favorable to us and to be prepared to prevail if we step beyond competition and try to push things back down to competition as fast as we can. To do that, our joint force has to do several things. We have to control the air, sea, and cyber approaches to the United States. We have to deter and defend against attacks on the United States. And then we have to be prepared to fight as an expeditionary force alongside our allies and partners around the world. And when you add up those requirements and you look at our new national defense strategy that tells us how to approach it, our secretary has concluded that we're not big enough. We don't have the right capabilities or a big enough Air Force to be able to do all those tasks. And I know you got a chance to hear from her earlier in the week, and we'll work together to determine what those numbers should be. But a couple things about that battlefield I want to lead into our discussion today is that the proliferation of capable ISR tools beyond the United States. So great powers possess their own national technical means, and then intelligence professionals are learning to rely more and more on publicly available information and the things that we reveal about ourselves and our capabilities. So do our enemies around the world. And when you take that expanded government, publicly available, and new commercial intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance tools that are available from satellites to people on short notice all over the world, and you combine that with ubiquitous long-range fires, both kinetic and non-kinetic fires that allow people to reach out and touch things all around the world, it means that this battlefield that we're considering has no boundaries anymore. People can see all the way back to us and our garrison. There are no hiding places. They can watch and they know what we're doing wherever we are. And there are no sanctuaries. There are no safe areas in this competition of the future. There's no place where you can say, I can take a deep breath and I'll wait till I get closer and then I'll be ready for the fight. So that puts us in a battle of long-range fires. And we're handicapped by the fact that our enemies are shooting at fixed targets, mostly ports and airfields, while we have to find agile, mobile, hard-to-find targets, mobile air defense systems, mobile long-range fire systems, mobile anti-satellite systems. And so our advantage in the past, we're going to leverage. And if you listen to Chairman Dunford, he'll say that the way to attract those problems is not to drive into traps that people have spent 20 years building for us. It's to leverage multi-regional, multi-domain, and multi-service approaches. And those multi-regional, multi-domain, and multi-service approaches rely on the mobility advantage that you have given the United States in the past and that we'll continue to rely on in the future. So in this new world, this battle of long-range fires, it means that getting to the fight becomes the fight. We have to be able to get there and get close enough to be able to bring our kinetic and non-kinetic capabilities to bear. And the counters to our approach and the things that peer adversaries are doing to try to defeat our strengths are really counters to you and that mobility advantage that we've depended on. So they attack your capabilities and strengths. They want to limit our mobility and range extension advantages. And the result of that is that we're limited in both capacity and capability during this competition period. And so every day as the Air Combat Command commander, I look at the list of aircraft that we're moving back and forth across the oceans to support our allies or support our COCOMs, and how many of them are waiting where they broke somewhere along the way for an en route support team or for the tankers they need to make it back. The short story I'll share with you is that an A-10 squadron from Moody Air Force Base in Valdosta, Georgia, recently deployed and came back from Red Flag, Alaska. And because of the shortage and our limitations, they hopped A-10s from Georgia to Alaska. Imagine that. That's kind of a lifetime adventure all in one. And they trucked their maintenance from Georgia up the Alcan to Anchorage and back. And the impact that has on Air Combat Command's readiness is that that was 60 days that that squadron was without all their equipment, without all of their tools and their sortie generation equipment that were on those trucks. And then every time we deploy, coming back from an overseas deployment, if airplanes break along the way, then every day they're broken is a day that we can't resume training for our conflict with that peer adversary. So the combination of our aging fleet and the things that our adversaries do to defeat the advantage you've given us have an impact in competition on our readiness. And then those same impacts will affect us in conflict as well. They affect our ability to deter adversaries if they think they can target our mobility advantage, and they affect our ability to defeat them. In Air Combat Command right now, we have two big priorities, and you can kind of guess what they were, at least the first one, if you heard the Secretary of the Air Force talk. The first one is regaining our full spectrum readiness to be prepared and to meet the goals that she gave us to meet them, which are short-term goals. And so we focused our entire machine on being able to fly enough and to sustain our weapon systems enough to meet those goals. And then our second priority is to integrate the capabilities of 24th Air Force, our cyber-numbered Air Force, into Air Combat Command and into the Air Force. What do they need from us to be effective? And how can we integrate those cyber tools into all that Air Combat Command does? And so that's led me to do some thinking about some of the terms that we've used forever. We've used terms like the CAF, the Combat Air Forces, and the MAF, the Mobility Air Forces. And as I look at Air Combat Command, I'm not sure that those terms are still relevant to us, or at least as relevant to us as they were. Now, I think there's some advantages to having a uniquely unarmed mobility force, because it means you can get into places and do things with the C-17 or a tanker that partners are willing to sign up and say yes to, and further the relationship with those countries. And so I leave the MAF up to you on how you want to think about that term and think about yourself. But on the CAF side, we use that term to narrowly define the Air Force's bombers and fighters for many years. That was the CAF. That led to the creation of Air Combat Command that brought those two together. Over time, we've split the bombers back into Global Strike Command, and we're left with an Air Combat Command that now includes fighters and rescue, the traditional component, command and control, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, our cyber capabilities in 24th Air Force, and our share of the agile combat support that makes that possible. So we're taking a look at how we present all those forces to joint warfighters and to the Air Force. Should we reorganize within our NAF structure? Should we make some changes within our wings to put them together in the best way possible? And as part of that, we're thinking through those definitions. When the Secretary talks about roughly 200 pacing squadrons that have to be ready in the short term, most of our squadrons fall into that category. And then of the 300 or so total operational squadrons as she mixes them, all our squadrons, many fit into that. So you've heard the Secretary talk about the fist that delivers the punch, that has to have a body behind it, to strike an effective blow. We also want to think about what's the composition of the fingers in that fist? What makes up the fist? And if, as we said, the fight of the future, the expeditionary fight of the future, is a fight to get there with the capabilities that matter and stay there in the face of the threats that they built, then what does that mean to those terms and to us as teammates as we go forward into the future? Last year, we talked a little bit about some partnership opportunities, some training opportunities, and some ideas we called adaptive basing, where we were going to learn to move around the battlefield and make the enemy's targeting problem more difficult. And we invited you and your units to participate, and you have. And we've learned some lessons, and we've worked through some ideas together. We've practiced together at doing that, and I appreciate the growth in training. This year, I think we're ready to start refining those and recording what we've learned and documenting that in our doctrine so that we're not asking each wing to make up its own approach to that, or each partnership between one of your units and ours to make up their approach. I think we've learned some lessons that we can record and refine and go forward into doctrine. And then in October, we conducted our first major exercise in Air Combat Command, where our ISR forces were the training audience of the major exercise instead of the training aid for conventional CAF forces. And they worked with the Navy in one of their readiness exercises, and they were able to dedicate command and control and the analysis to focus on how they'll prepare to support combat forces with themselves as a training audience. And as we go forward in our partnership together, I think the next step we need to take is to move past the exercises where we participate with you occasionally and on a serial manner in your large exercises about how will we help you fight in and out of bases, and how can we build an exercise that has the Mobility Air Forces as the training audience on your role of opening the door and the fight to get there, and how can we support you in those exercises with the assets that you'll need to do that. And we look forward to working with you as we think through that. Let me catch up here a little bit, thanks. Okay, finally, this is a really important time to be in the Air Force, and it's an important time to be in the military and in the Mobility Air Forces. And we'll see if the microphone picks up here. Let's talk a little bit about you and the need we have for you and the options that you have as you go forward. So we're in a place in our country that economists, any economists in the room, I like to be careful before I get too confident in what I know about it. Economists talk about our economy as being at full employment. And what that doesn't mean that everybody has a job. It means that there are jobs that are going empty because industry, because of the commercial world, can't find people with the right qualifications to do it. And I'm sitting in a room full of people that have the qualifications that they're looking for. They're looking for people that have the discipline to follow through with the task and can be trusted to do it when nobody's watching them. They're looking for people that have technical skills in supply chain management and in moving people and stuff all around the world to meet their business ends. And they're looking for people that have the capacity for change and the resilience to learn new skills and to grow with the world as it changes. So we talk a lot about a pilot shortage, but the reality is we have a lot of shortages across our Air Force. And the people in the room, you guys are all in that pool where there are people out there that want you. When I was making my decision about whether I was going to stay in the Air Force or not in 1989, when my first commitment ran out from pilot training, I was getting the calls from my friends who had decided to leave. You know, hey, Mobile, there's a new 737 just delivered with your name on the side of it. You know, come on out, the water's fine, that many of you guys are getting. And I worked through that decision, and what I talked about and thought about with my family was this idea of where do we find our meaning and purpose? And what is it that we care about? And where are we going to find that as we go forward in the future? At that time in 1989, I knew that if I left the Air Force to go join the airlines, it was 4 to 5 years before I would regain the buying power I had as a senior captain in the Air Force. The world we're living in now, I know that for the pilots in the room, now in 2 years, you'll make more than General Miller and I do as an airline pilot. And there's a calculus that's there, and I know you have to think about it. But as you think about this meaning and purpose, I want you to also consider the opportunity costs of what you'll be walking away from. I got the chance to go yesterday to Vance and be a graduation speaker at an SUPT graduation for my friend and a great mobility airman for Colonel Corey Simmons out there at Vance. And every time I go back to UPT, I'm reminded of the first time that I felt like a part of a community in the Air Force. For me, it was Columbus Air Force Base in 1982, flying T-38s. And that was the first time in the Air Force that I felt like I was a valued member of a high-performing team that was doing something important that was bigger than me. I spent the next 10 years or so flying the F-15, and I was a part of that community. But my first home that I found in the Air Force was there in SUPT. So as you think about what you're going to do and where you're going to go in the future, think about that home. Think about where your home is, and think about where you find your meaning and purpose. After 37 years, what I would tell you is that the reason I'm still serving in the Air Force is because of you. I find my meaning and purpose in the time that I get to spend with you and with airmen like you and with your families, and it's been enough. And I think about the opportunities my family has had and the things I would not have been able to do if I had decided to step out the door at that point. You know, Sarah and I have raised a daughter that's a physicist that works at the National Lab in Los Alamos with a brand new physics PhD. We've raised a son that finished his last training event yesterday. He's a guard baby F-16 pilot in the DC Guard with his catfish nose. which is extending our total force family. I think about the places we've had the opportunity to live, but more than that, I think about the people that I've served with. And people ask me, hey, General Holmes, do you miss flying? Do you miss being out there in a flying squadron? And I go, yeah, I do. But what I really miss is being around people that fly and fix airplanes. If I miss anything, it's being a part of that community that exists at the squadron level. So when you read through the things that the Chief and the Secretary have asked us to do to revitalize our squadrons, think about your role in that, and think about how we work together to make that a community that we feel like is home for us. And think about how we'll maintain that community as we go forward in the future. I want to continue to feel like that I'm a valued member of a high-performing team that does something important, and I want you to feel like that too. And so it's up to the leaders of the Air Force to try to create an environment where you do feel like you're a part of that community. But if you decide that your meaning and purpose takes you somewhere else and it's time to take your family somewhere else, then I'll be in line to help you do that. I encourage you to affiliate in the reserve component if you do, because they need you too, and they face the same shortages that we face on the active component, and there is a meaningful, purposeful life to be found there, as many of you in the room know, that work there every day, and we'll help you do that as well. And if your meaning and purpose takes you somewhere completely different, then we'll help you do that too.